What scares you the most about Bitcoin adoption? Because if there was no opportunity, if there's no risk, there wouldn't be an opportunity, and vice versa. What scares you the most?
I don't really see anything that scares me. I think Bitcoin has crossed the event horizon. 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been concerned that ignorance in the political sphere would cause some powerful politician to want to ban it. Right? I mean, if you look at the ladder of Bitcoin appreciation, people start at the bottom rung, which is the Bitcoin denier. And they think Bitcoin is tulip bulbs or Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, and it's like the Peter Schiff denial. And then they move to the next level, which is Bitcoin skeptic. Bitcoin is a digital commodity. It works. You can send value between two parties without a trusted intermediary. It's an innovation, but it's too good to be true, and the government's going to ban it. Right. Lots of people said that about 2 years ago. I mean, Ray Dalio said that. Jamie Dimon said that. Larry Fink kind of implied that. It used to be that there were a lot of very powerful, successful, either politicians or powerful, successful money managers that were skeptics. And in the last 24 months, those skeptics have been largely silenced. When the head of the CFTC says Bitcoin's a digital commodity and we're going to support it, and when the head of the SEC says Bitcoin is a digital commodity, we're going to support it. And when the head of the Central Bank of Europe and the Central Bank of the United States say, yeah, it's a digital asset, we recognize it. We're not going to block it. We're not moving against it. When the government says we need to embrace it, when you have 4 political candidates, 4 in the history of the United States, I don't think there's ever been an example where you had 4 political candidates running for president endorsing a new asset. It would be similar to, I guess, if you had the leading Republican and the leading Democratic candidate saying, we think every American deserves to own their own home, and we're going to sponsor legislation to make it cheap and easy for them to own their own home. Maybe something like that, right? So at this point, it's kind of hard to say that skeptics are winning the day, right? The skeptics are being shouted down. They're out of the mainstream. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Times, CNBC, a bunch of senators, a bunch of Congress persons, the head of the Senate Finance Committee or the House Finance Committee. I think they all acknowledge that Bitcoin is here to stay. In fact, Jerome Powell just yesterday, right, was asked this point blank in congressional testimony and said, yeah, I think it's not going away. So I don't worry about the skeptics. Now we're just at the stage where you're either an investor where you think, oh, it's an asset. Maybe I'll buy it. Maybe I'll short it. Maybe it's overvalued, undervalued. I'll just trade it. I'm a trader. Or you're a technocrat. It's the dominant digital monetary network. It's 100 times more powerful than the next proof of work network. It's indestructible. It's like the Apple of money or the Google of digital money. So I think I'll just get on this one, on for the ride, because it's destined to 10x from here and nobody can stop it. And then the final layer you get to, if you spend enough time studying this, is you become a maximalist. And to be clear, here's what a maximalist means. It doesn't mean that every nation state will fail. It doesn't mean that we won't have currencies like the yen and the dollar and the peso and the yuan and the euro. It doesn't mean that people won't invest in real estate or in Apple stock or Google or in natural gas fields. It doesn't mean that there won't be other companies creating new stuff. It doesn't mean there won't be art. It doesn't mean there won't be digital art. It doesn't mean all these other things. What it means is you think that Bitcoin is an instrument of economic empowerment to the world. It means that you believe it's not just the dominant digital monetary network or the dominant digital property network, if you want. You can call it digital money. You can call it digital property. You can call it digital scarcity. You can call it a digital commodity. All those are true. And it's the dominant one because you would need 3 Earths full of electricity and every computer on Earth to interfere, and you still wouldn't beat it. That's why it's dominant. It wasn't always dominant. 10 years ago, it wasn't. You could have stopped it. But once it gets to 400 exahash, it's pretty clear that it's past the event horizon because those Bitcoin miners are 2,000 to 1 more efficient than a CPU from Amazon. And so when you've got a silicon ratchet that's 2,000x more powerful than the commodity compute power, that's what makes it an indestructible wall of digital energy. So When you're a maximalist, you say, okay, well, it's the dominant digital network or dominant digital money network. But you would also say 8 billion people are deprived of property rights, and they don't have a bank they can trust, and they don't have scarce, desirable property. And people in Indonesia or Africa or South America, they don't have the option to buy city blocks in New York City. They can't even buy a square foot in New York City. New York City is a decent investment idea. Lots of rich people got rich by investing in New York City, but it's not the best idea. The best idea is cyber Manhattan for everybody. So Bitcoin in that way is ethically superior to Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Alibaba, WeChat. Those are all great companies. And as a technocrat, you can invest in those because you say they're going to 10x. Right? I did. I made a lot of money, invested in Apple, invested in Amazon. I said, they're obviously going to stomp everybody. 25,000 retailers fail. Amazon succeeds. Walmart and Target barely keep up, right? That's the story of retail in the past 20 years. So yeah, I'm a technocrat. But I don't pretend that Amazon is the ethical solution to the problems of people in Indonesia or Nigeria. I don't even think Amazon pretends, right? And Apple clearly is not the solution to people in China, and nor is Google. Google's banned in China. So Bitcoin is special because it's not a company, right? When we talk about an asset without an issuer, there's an economic implication. It's superior to a company that's a digital monopoly because there's no attack surface. The Chinese and the Europeans can target Google, Apple, and Facebook because they're not Chinese and they're not European. But you can't target a non-company that's everywhere and nowhere. There is no headquarters. There is no management team. There's no CEO to subpoena, right? So when a government in Central Africa decides to deprive all of their citizens of property rights and say, you're not allowed to have Bitcoin, well, there's no Bitcoin CEO to arrest, right? Or subpoena or put on an Interpol notice warrant. So Bitcoin is nation state resistant, and it is profoundly ethical because I can start a company in China that offers Bitcoin services to the Chinese, and I don't have to be Apple to do it. And I can start a company in Nigeria and a different one in Argentina and a different one in Russia and a different one in Ukraine and a different one in Siberia and a different one in fill in the blank. And the politics are going to lurch back and forth. But ultimately, the conclusion is life is pretty hopeless for billions and billions of people around the world without Bitcoin. And with Bitcoin, a poor Uber driver or tour guide in Central Africa has the same property rights as a billionaire on the Upper East Side of New York City with an army of lawyers whose brother is the governor. And you're not going to be able to hold out shares of Apple stock as the moral equivalent for the next 100 years. I have been the CEO of a publicly traded company. I'm an officer of a publicly traded company. I can't promise you what the management of my company will be like in 100 years or 50 years. I don't know. So Bitcoin in that regard is special. What do I worry about? I don't really worry about anything. I mean, at this point, it's just a matter of who's winning and who's losing and how fast is this entire story going to play out, right? If you want to help your family and your friends, then you go and you advocate Bitcoin to them. Like, you want to help your country? Let's take Turkey. Okay, well, Turkey's got a problem. Their currency is collapsing. And as the currency collapses, all the people of Turkey are being impoverished. They've lost 96% of their wealth against the dollar in 20 years. They have a $20 to $40 billion balance of payments problem every year. They have $50 billion of gold. You want to solve the problems of Turkey? What worries me? Well, if I was Turkish, this would worry me, right? Sell the $50 billion of gold, buy $50 billion worth of Bitcoin. Bitcoin will go up by a factor of 4 to 5. The Turkey central bank will have $250 billion of Bitcoin. Bitcoin will appreciate anywhere from 15 to 20% a year thereafter. They will end up with a $40 billion surplus from their Bitcoin position, offsetting a $20 to $40 billion deficit from their balance of trade problem. The Turkish lira will actually turn around and strengthen Everybody in Turkey gets rich or gets richer. They stop getting poor. The country is saved. The currency is saved. The people are saved. They start an avalanche. What would I worry about? I worry about holding gold. If you're asking me, what do I fear? I don't fear anything if I actually have the superior asset. If I was a gold holder, I would fear that one person in Turkey would have the clarity, the conviction, and the courage to sell all the gold and buy Bitcoin. Because if that one person does that, then everybody else is going to start to copy them. The price of gold is going to crash from $1,900 an ounce down to $200 an ounce over time. Gold will approach its utility value. The monetary premium gets stripped off of it. Other nations will start to do the same thing. The nations that move first will have their currencies benefit, because instead of having your currency backed by gold, your currency be backed by Bitcoin. Your nation is backed by Bitcoin. Your nation goes on the Bitcoin standard. What happened to the African nations that kept the glass bead standard when the Europeans showed up on the gold standard, right? The Europeans basically printed a bunch of glass beads, used it to buy everything in the African nation, enslaved everybody in Africa, owned everything, and impoverished everyone that stayed on the glass bead standard. So, is the gold standard working in Turkey? No. If it was working, the lira wouldn't be crashing, right? Is the gold standard working in China? No, they're not on the gold standard. The CNY is weak. How do you know it's weak? Because they have capital controls. If they drop the capital controls, everybody would take their money out of the CNY and the CNY would crash. It's not really a question of worrying about Bitcoin. You ought to worry about everything else. If you have any money in anything other than Bitcoin, you should be worrying that someone's going to get rational and start to short or sell that asset you're holding as a store of value, and they're going to start to buy Bitcoin with it. Because when that happens, gold goes from $11 trillion market cap to $2 trillion market cap. Bitcoin goes from $500 billion market cap to $5 trillion market cap. By the way, I just laid this out for a nation. The same thing works for a company. Like my company's stock was $120 a share. We had $250 million of assets. We bought Bitcoin with it. Today, the stock is quadrupled almost, and we have $4.25 billion of assets. Our assets are up by a factor of 20. We've made billions of dollars for our shareholders. Our stock is up 150%, which outperforms Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, every one of the big tech companies, every asset class. So what do you fear? If we bought gold would have been down 4%. If we had bought gold, we would have $220 million of gold right now instead of $4.2 billion worth of Bitcoin right now. That's what you fear. So the big idea is you can be on a Bitcoin standard. Your company can be on a Bitcoin standard. Your country can be on a Bitcoin standard. You don't have the option to not be on a Bitcoin standard. The decision to not be on a Bitcoin standard is the decision to be on a gold standard, or an Airbnb apartment standard, or an S&P standard, or a silver standard, or a bond standard, or you want to be on the peso standard. The peso has gone from 1 peso to the dollar to 485 pesos to the dollar in 20 years. That's losing 99.8% of your wealth in 20 years. Against the dollar's lost 75% of its wealth in the same time frame against scarce assets. So you want to be on a peso standard, you're going to lose 99.95% of your wealth in 20 years. So the fear really is somebody does it to you, right? A good idea is an idea that you wouldn't want your competitor to pursue to your detriment. So I'm beyond the fearing of Bitcoin. I think we're past the event horizon. It's pretty clear it's winning. It's been accepted. It's accepted in China. The Chinese acknowledge it as a digital asset. If the Chinese, the Europeans, the Middle Easterners, the Singaporeans, the Africans, the South Americans, the North Americans all acknowledge Bitcoin, what am I worried about? Really, your worries are all about your own business, your own family, your own country, your own city. You can execute poorly. You can take your Bitcoin and put it with BlockFi or Celsius or FTX and have the counterparty fail. You can worry about that. I guess I would say I worry about counterparties, right? We all worry about all the counterparties we deal with, and who do you trust? You get a hardware wallet, does it have a hole in it? when people send me a hardware wallet, they're like, this is just for you. I'm giving it to you for free. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not using this one. Right. Right. So there are things to worry about, but they're common sense things to worry about as opposed to Bitcoin itself. The whole principle of Bitcoin is we've created an asset on a network to eliminate counterparty risk in the asset and counterparty risk in the network. When you actually own a commodity, you have counterparty risk to the other commodity manufacturers and the physical jurisdictions you custody the commodity in. And when you have a commodity you can't self-custody, then you have counterparty risk to the custodian. And that gets your gold seized, or that gets your oil embargoed, or whatever. So Bitcoin is all about eliminating counterparty risk. So I think probably just don't F it up, right? Like, don't try to fix it, right? Don't try to fix Bitcoin like that. You wonder why the Bitcoin maxi is so hostile to people with their ideas. Like, we just want to double the block size, or we want to change that rule. They're hostile to that because it's already perfect. And it's a bunch of imperfect people with a large ego that think that they can improve it, and they want to basically F it up. So I would probably be a bit worried about that if there was any threat, but Bitcoin, I think, is stabilized. The protocol is stabilized. The community is very committed to the current conservative principles of Bitcoin. So I don't see that as a threat. I think now we're just in an expansion adoption stage. And as William Gibson said, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So, you just think about where, if you have perfect money and perfect economic energy and a perfect network, the issue is, how do you want to distribute it? And that's where you guys come in, where everybody comes in, right? We're all educators, and we're just educating the world so they can figure out that it is a useful technology that can make their lives better, and then figure out how to harness it. Like I give you two last examples, fire and electricity. They're both good for the human race, but you can get burned by fire and you can get shocked by electricity. So even though I'm an electricity maximalist and I'm a fire maximalist, if I worry about things, I worry about burning the house down or electrocuting myself, as you should. Be appropriate with the technology. But otherwise, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist.